Hello, everyone. Welcome to the 10x Growth Strategies podcast. I'm your host, Saradha Sriram, business technology strategist. Today, we have with us Paul Singh Oberoi. Paul is the CEO of OneGen, a social innovation organization with a very diverse portfolio. Welcome to our podcast, Paul.
Happy to be here, Saradha.
The book we're discussing today is Billion Dollar Lessons by Paul B. Carroll and Chanka Moi. Paul, our guest today, has been one of the researchers for this book. Paul, could you tell us about your background and what drew you to study business failures rather than successes, and how did you participate in the making of this book?
Great. Thank you, Saradha, for inviting me to this wonderful conversation. So back in the time, I finished my MBA and joined a boutique consulting firm called Diamond out of Chicago. This was my very first consulting project, which was to help Paul and Shanka do the research for the book. And I grabbed the opportunity for various reasons, but I think the primary driver for me was just an opportunity to work with both of them. When they discussed the topic of the book, it was sort of a bonus for me because here I'm coming, with fresh case studies and MBA theoretical knowledge. And the idea was to make something opposite of what a good to great book is, right? Like not studying the fancy successes and companies who succeed, but how do we learn from failures? And I think that was sort of the novelty aspect of it. Like, I'm gonna be researching, the biggest inexcusable business failures of last 25 years, and attempt was to try to find a pattern. So I think the subject matter, an opportunity to work with two thought leaders, and I thought like this would be, a great learning opportunity, which it was. And I thoroughly enjoyed the research work. And when the book came out, lessons from those experiences, I still use it till today. It's been 17 plus years. So over and all, this is one of my favorite book, not just because I've worked on it, but it's very well written, and there's so many great stories, and but more importantly, what can we learn from failures? Which was very new aspect for me.
That is so true, and seems to be a very interesting experience to have to participate and have this book be published. What are your key takeaways, or would you like to talk or highlight the specific topics that you researched on?
Yeah, so the book actually talks about seven very distinctly identified patterns of failures, and we had a lot of data to sort of segment them in those things. I worked about in three areas, and one of my um, favorite subject, and also the first chapter in the book, was around the synergy myth. When two mergers happen, two companies merge, or there's an acquisition, typically they're inflated valuations, and there is a extra premium in the transaction, which is attributed to synergy. That how this would actually create new business opportunities, open up new markets, and also some cost synergies by consolidating things and so. But I think through our research, we debunked that myth, that how difficult and almost impossible. In 9 out of 10 cases, it's an illusion, because what you plan and estimate, it's very hard to realize it. Revenue side synergies are a lot more harder to realize than cost side synergies. But I think the key takeaway for me was how, again and again, how important people and culture are to realizing a successful merger, or a joint venture or acquisition. And I think we saw several examples, and so that key takeaway sort of stood with me till today. As in my current role, in our firm does a lot of advisory engagements, and typically our portfolio has a lot of projects where we are called for post merger integration, technology, processes, operations. And I think that key takeaway, which I learned during this book exercise back in 2008, still drives me to, pay an extra emphasis on how important cultural integration and people play such a crucial role for that. So I think that was sort of one of the key takeaway, that assumptions behind synergy realizations needs to be challenged, double checked, and so that was sort of one of the major key takeaway. Along with that, there were many other failure patterns and uh, lessons from looking at and studying the mistake of others. And although I know this book has been out for about 17 years, I was just going through it as a preparation for today's podcast. It made me realize how relevant it is even today in the times today. So I think my second takeaway would be, and there's a chapter which talks about, how successful companies sometimes miss market signals and emerging technologies, and especially disruption scenarios. So, and what are the causes behind it, right? And book talks at length about, you know, uh, the Kodak example, Xerox example. So we see post-book 2008 timeframe, how Detroit auto industry lost its edge to Tesla because electric vehicles were um, not considered as sort of they missed the trend. In fact, GM killed their electric vehicle line because it was cannibalizing their own vehicle sales, right? So that sort of a great example. We saw Netflix emerging and Blockbuster going away. And so you can see that this pattern continues to emerge. So the key takeaway for me and from the book is also that what makes a sane organization, a very successful organization, miss all these things. And even though they understand that this is a powerful trend, there's a signal, there's an emerging technology wave, but they still continue to remain on the path rather than pivoting. So I think when you learn from those things, then as a consultant and then as an advisor for my clients, I try to bring in that level of thinking about like what can you do today so that you can actually sow the seeds for getting ready for disruption 3 years from now, 2 years from now. And so we are in this wave of evolution of AI, and almost every day the speed of disruption and emergence technology is just getting exponentially greater and faster. So I think there are a lot of relevant lessons from the book to apply into is the organization ready to adopt AI technologies, and where the greatest value can be extracted. And sometimes it means changing things, and that's where the lessons lie. So those I would say stand out to me. That how do you really realize synergies and importance of people and culture, and then um, how do you pivot and when do you pivot? How do you evaluate these emerging trends and react or respond?
That is so true. I like how you focused on some of the failure patterns that this book highlights, especially the synergy myth. And having been in business integration for a lot of M&As, like you talk about, uh, I think there are certain cases that could have been proactively avoided too. And I also like how you focused on the modern context and applications, how they fumble with technology instead of they're writing the wrong technology.
Exactly.
I think one more topic that really caught my eye was playing the devil's advocate,
Yeah.
like unleashing the power of conflict and deliberation. Uh, could you talk to us a little bit about that?
Sure. I'll tell you, I think when I picked up on the research project, the original title of the book was actually The Devil's Advocate. That's how the project was labeled as, and sort of it has a very catchy tune to it. Um, and obviously, Chanka told us the historical aspect of that. This is how Catholic Church used to before giving somebody sainthood or, moving them up in the organization, they will play, there'll be people who will be, singing praises for the candidate, and then there'll be intentionally appointed people who will play devil's advocate to kind of build the case against it. So I think that was a historic context, but it was very interesting to see the simplicity and its power, right? I'll give you a quick example, right? Um, as a friend, if I come to you and say, Saradha, look, I baked this cake, and you try and say, okay, so what do you think, right? And more than often, like you don't want to hurt my feelings, no matter how the cake is. You say, oh, that's great. Okay, I don't believe you tried it for the first time, kind of thing. Because we are programmed to sort of have cognitive biases, and there's a group thinking in a group setting. If I ask the same thing within a friendly group, or think about our boardrooms, uh, the herding mindset can come in. Sometimes people are subdued by the dominating voice in the room. So, but what if I ask you the same question in a negative hypothesis? So, Sarda, I baked this cake for the first time. Tell me, how can I make it better? So, by intentionally, asking the diverging point of view and adding that conflict with the negatives, like, tell me, how can I make it better? And I'm insinuating that it's not, it can be made better. I'm giving you a safe space to share your point of view. And I think that's really the essence of it. Is like a lot of times I've seen organizations again and again that strategy is built based on historic context, based on data, and very analytically driven, and it's confirmed by top of the line business consulting firms, but it's mostly confirmation bias, right? Like, okay, are we checking all the boxes, right? But very rarely um, some visionary leaders will bring in intentionally people to say, poke holes at it and let us defend it, right? And that's what really the book talks about, a framework about that. Almost all of these failures could have been avoided if somebody would have raised their hand, say, okay, but what about this, right? Have you thought about this? And challenge the assumption, and you see, like house of cards, how everything falls down. So, so I think it's a very interesting mindset, and book talks about, the second half of the book is all about. It's not about like, look how stupid these strategies were and they failed, right? They were they were doomed from the time they were inked on the paper. But it also talks very practically about, like, how can you avoid such scenario? But it takes courage, it takes leadership, because leaning into conflict is not an easy thing, and not every organization has that safe space where discourse is encouraged, kind of thing. So I think that's where that's the to me the second half of the book is where you get your money's worth, and there are interesting stories and basis by which this framework can be applied. Scenario planning, you can stress test your strategies, and hence the framework name is like around playing a devil's advocate, which is deliberately and intentionally um, bringing in dissent and conflict so that you can tear apart your strategic thought process and see if it stands the test.
Absolutely. I mean, are there any practical applications, like, how executives can take some concrete steps to avoid failures in their own organizations? I know you also do advisory in this, capacity. So can you give us a couple of examples of how these frameworks can be implemented?
Yeah, so I think a lot depends on the cultural fabric in the organization, and the nature of the leadership. But I've had a privilege of working with some great CEOs and CIOs who have been operating at a sort of cutting edge, and I will label them easily pioneers in their domain. And so, learning from them and lessons from the book, I think if I can, summarize in 3 bullet points, I think it would be that what what works what works now or what has worked for us in the past is not a guarantee that it will work in the future. So I think challenging those assumptions, which sometimes we take it for granted and sometimes it comes from, and success breeds those things, right? Because organizations who have done it 100 times and they say, oh, we know it. And I think what it does is that very often creates strategic blind spots, and that's what you want to avoid. So I think before undertaking any major strategy, especially transformational projects, um, just double checking your rear view mirrors and sort of removing those blind spots, and asking somebody to play the informal role of devil's advocate, asking for um, divergent inputs. I think that's one way to do that. The other thing that was very commonly missed during these patterns of failures was the group thinking and herding mindset, right? So how does that emerge in any team of executive boardroom members and any operational team? You can take an example, but what happens is that sometimes people don't feel safe to voice their concerns. Sometimes they don't feel even qualified enough that and they are afraid to sort of open up their challenging perspective, because there could be career repercussions, punitive damages, or just like you don't want to go against the grain. So I think the leaders who actively and consciously create an environment where that concept I mentioned earlier, leaning into the conflict, is encouraged, and so people feel safer to voice their concerns. I think that's another way you could avoid those kind of things. So it's creating a safe environment and not just sort of having a consensus, how many people vote for this thing, or having some people having veto powers kind of thing. So I think that sort of thing can be used for avoidable. And the other third and last point I would say is how failures can be avoided, is by um, differentiating between signal and noise. So you took it on media, newspaper, specialist expert advice. And I'm again bringing an example of what we are actively dealing with for the last 6 months is almost every organization is asking for AI strategy. Some of them may be ahead than the others, right? And everybody is having this fear of missing out kind of a mindset that we don't want to be the one which is like, oh, AI is a fad and will go away. So they want to do the right things because their peers group is doing the same thing or their competitors are doing the same thing. But I think the very few CEOs that, at least in my network, have a clear vision about that, like any other powerful technological advancement, this is actually an opportunity for business transformation with the help of technology and not the other way around. So I think I'm seeing a lot of repeating patterns of putting cart before the horse. So it's like, oh, we have this generative AI technology. Now, how do we find a problem to solve it? Versus that, what's our vision and where do we want to take our customer experience? How do we want to grow in new markets? How do we want to offer more innovative solutions and products? And how this technology can help us get there faster, better, cheaper. So it's just a different way of thinking. So I think those come to my mind, those 3 pointers about how repeating patterns of failures, strategic failures, can be avoided. But again, it goes back to your leadership style, the organizational fabric. How decisions get made are more important than actual decisions that get made, right? So process of making critical decision on which future of an organization depends, I think that's more critical in my mind than the actual decision making process.
I like how you built this, and more importantly, how you were talking about hedging your bets on ensuring their future implications are kept in mind in the modern context. So that came together pretty nicely. You also mentioned that this book was written 17, 18 years ago. Uh, what's the single most important lesson you hope readers take from this, from that time period? And if I might add, one additional context is if you participated in helping rewrite the book,
Yeah.
what would you add or change based on recent business failures?
True. No, I think uh, I hope there's a 2.0 of the same book because there've been so many even more interesting stories since 2008. This book came out before the 2008 financial meltdown. So I think there's a lot of lessons from financial services market and the e-commerce industry, and also the um, advancements in electric vehicles and other things. So there are a lot of trends, and I think the cycle repeats every 4 to 5 years, and you can see the S curve getting faster and faster, kind of getting steeper, and that's what we are seeing. So I would say same framework is so applicable today, as I said earlier, that the relevance of this devil's advocate approach and a way to evaluate and assess early red flags on your strategic steps that you're going to take. I mean, they are relevant, right? Nobody wants to knowingly go into loss-making bets. And what this book I think showed us 17 years ago, and I think it's relevant in today's business world as well, because I haven't seen the bankruptcy and write-off data in the last 10 years, but I bet that it hasn't reduced. It's probably gone up. And I think now, if I look at a larger context, in 2025, I think if this book is rewritten and you talk about implications of uh, bad strategies, or how do you avoid bad strategies, I think there's an additional set of factors that need to be considered, because there used to be time, early 2000 in the time frame, and when the book looked into late 90s, early 2000, that just focusing your strategy on how do you maximize profits and shareholder value could do the job. But I think we live in such a dynamic world, so many uncertainties surround us, and every leader in every business sphere, in every domain, no matter where in the world you are. So how do you factor in the assumption around changing climate patterns? How do you address the issue of income inequality and its impact on consumer behavior, or the macroeconomic factors in one market impacting the supply chains from other part of the world? So I think the strategic decisions have become even more complex, if not hyper complex, than I would say in the last 10 to 15 years. Faster advancements in technology doesn't help the case, because again, as I mentioned, there's a lot of noise versus signal. So I would say the relevance of the book is even more greater today, and where I think the making sound strategies, um, and how do you assess them, how do you stress test them using this framework, is very much relevant by using this devil's advocate approach, the framework mentioned in the book, and you won't even change a word in the second half of the book. You may have more examples to strengthen your case, and and a quick proof of that is that I use devil's advocate approach almost in pretty much all the engagements that we do, where the strategy is involved. We do it internally at OneGen a lot, right? So I have a team, my leadership team. I don't like the decisions when it's made by consensus. So my approach is like, okay, so who's the devil's advocate today? Like, you basically help us sort of bring in the divergent point of view so we can talk about a different perspective. What if scenarios, and so I think in sound decision making, this is a timeless classic in that sense. So I would say, even though the complexity has increased, the technical advancements have are on the verge of fundamentally changing business paradigms, new business models emerging. So I would say if you are a leader in your organization, especially C-level executives, this is a must read. If you read Good to Great, I think it's a flip side of that, which is also important. So you have both sides of perspectives.
That is so true. And it is very refreshing to hear that you use these frameworks on a daily basis and you inculcate, and help people have agency within your teams. I do see that the billion dollar lessons where Paul, B. Carroll, and Chankamoy explores why major companies fail. It highlights recurring mistakes such as faulty strategies, poor management decisions, ignoring market realities. I thank you for distilling lessons from these failures to help businesses avoid similar pitfalls and achieve sustainable processes and succeed. I want to express my gratitude to our listeners and especially you, Paul. Your curiosity and engagement drive this podcast, and I'm excited to continue this journey of exploration and discovery with each one of you. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you, Saradha, and thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely.